Yesterday, an amendment forcing the Northern Ireland Secretary to issue guidance to explain how officials can continue to enforce the abortion laws in Northern Ireland. That's been passed by MPs. Now, MPs voted to impose their will on this issue, which is normally a reserved issue at Stormont, which, of course, is the regional legislature in Northern Ireland, which hasn't been sitting for ages. MPs argued that the abortion ban was incompatible with human rights on an amendment that was proposed by a couple of Labour MPs, Stella Creasy and Conor McGinn. This will not change the law in and of itself in Northern Ireland. My question to you this morning is, do you think it should? 0345 6060 973. Why on earth should women's autonomy over their own bodies not be available in one part of the country? 0345 6060 973. I absolutely and have always been firmly in favour of the right to choose. And I think if we find it distasteful or uncomfortable when people have abortions later in their pregnancy terms, then you absolutely start to fix that by reducing the shame and opprobrium and hatred that's poured over the heads of people who decide that they want to have a termination. Surely if someone is deciding whether or not it's the right thing for them, far better that they decide or make the decision that they want to have a termination as early as possible, rather than make that decision later in their pregnancy. John Deighan, Deputy CEO of the Society for the Protection of Unborn Children, joining me this morning. John, thank you for doing so. Good morning. This landmark amendment then forcing the Northern Ireland Secretary to issue that guidance to explain how this abortion law, or at least how the abortion law in Northern Ireland will and continue to be enforced. It's been passed by MPs. It's all a bit parliamentary. It's all a bit technical. What are your thoughts on this, first of all?
Well, it's a disappointment, really. The amendment will go through. It's quite an unusual and confusing amendment. It gives the impression that perhaps there's been some shift in the law on abortion in Northern Ireland. However, that's very much not the case. The Secretary of State for Ireland was at pains to emphasise that there's no way that this could give officials in Ireland the opportunity to change the law. So it doesn't actually change anything, but I think it's just an attempt by the pro-abortion MPs to grab the headlines and maybe raise hopes for the pro-abortionists in Northern Ireland that there is a change coming.
Why should they be denied that hope? Why should the law be different in one part of the UK?
Well, I'd say, I'd put it the other way around. Why should babies be protected in the womb in Ireland and not protected in the rest of the UK? So we could put it that way. I think that would be a proper, consistent approach to human rights, and that's one that I would propose for Northern Ireland. But the other point of the debate, I suppose, is whether the law in Ireland should be changed by the politicians elected for Northern Ireland, or whether they should be changed by MPs sitting in Westminster.
But there are no MPs, there are no politicians sitting in Northern Ireland. There haven't been since Stormont ceased sitting.
But what they're trying to endeavour to do, and what this bill was trying to do, was make sure that the devolved settlement could get up and working, and they're trying to bring about the Assembly coming back into force. And when they do that, that is what the population of Ireland seem to want to happen. And when they do that, then they can address these contentious issues rather than have the contentious issues decided beforehand. So I think that whatever way you want to vote on the issue, I think the people of Ireland seem to think that it should be their own politicians doing it and not the decision made for them from other politicians.
Yes, well, you talk about Ireland. Obviously, the Republic of Ireland voted in a referendum very strongly in favour of changing the constitution so that people could have the right to make a choice. It's only Northern Ireland, as I say, that's the only part of the country where that choice does not extend to women currently. And the DUP, of course, the DUP, you've got 10 MPs in Westminster, as we know, by definition a unionist party who, in terms of Brexit, are trying to do everything they can to ensure that that part of the country is treated identically to the rest of the UK, except when it comes to issues like this.
Well, I think they've got a particular view and on the Brexit issue. You know, they've worked with the unionist parties in the rest of the UK. In this particular issue, they've stood up for the devolved arrangement. The issue of Brexit's not devolved to the Assembly. However, the issue of abortion is, and they're trying to safeguard that and hope that the legislation can be addressed if it is addressed by politicians in Ireland. However, the substance we have to get back to is, there's no right. There should be no right to choose to end another human life, and this is what we're pushing here. So there has been this sort of web of deceit, really pushing that abortion somehow is an international human right. It's no such thing. In fact, the international human rights say that no one should be able to be deprived of their life.
But John, with respect, a very great number of people do not accept that a fetus in the womb is a human life as it is generally and readily understood.
Well, I'm afraid that they're wrong then, because that's been the result of a propaganda campaign that just repeats the same phrases time and time again.
Why is it wrong?
Because it's a living being. It has human parents, so it can only be human. Now,
from what age?
From the point it comes into existence. So from conception, it is a human
conception.
being.
It's a human being from
yes.
conception.
Yes, of course.
That can feel pain.
Well, a human being who's unconscious can't feel pain, so there are particular characteristics or capacities that a human being doesn't always exhibit. The thing about a human being is that a human being, right from the very beginning, when they come into existence, they have human parents, and if I deprive a human being of its life at any stage, I'm doing the same thing. So this is what is being pushed. But it's also being pushed through the extreme measures. We keep hearing stories about rape, about people with babies with fetal abnormalities. But the reality is the proposals that are being pushed, especially at Westminster, cover any baby up to 24 weeks. And this would include cases where the woman wants to have an abortion simply because the child is a female, and simply because it's an inconvenience. It would put a woman at risk of being pressured by others, and this is often the case.
So what is your position then on those very difficult cases when we are considering someone who's been raped, someone who's been the victim of rape by incest even, someone who's become pregnant in those conditions?
Those are typically the cases that are cited to make it sound as harrowing as possible.
No, but they are hard cases. I'm just wondering what your position and the position of SPUC is on them.
Yeah, well, I will explain it, but I would say the hard cases are used to open the door for what happens in the reality of cases. Like 99% of abortions are not for hard cases, as we found in the UK. They've had 9 million of them.
No, I accept that, but those cases exist. And what's your position on them?
Yeah. Well, what I would say is an abortion does not undo the brutality and violence of rape. In fact, what it does is it adds another unjust violence to another victim, but also puts the woman through an abortion, which is a traumatic experience. So I think it's something that doesn't help in that case. In the case of fetal abnormality, what I would say is a humane response to that would be to give compassion and care to make sure that the baby is supported as far as it can be. And the reality is that sometimes there are illnesses or disabilities that do lead to early death, but the proper way to deal with that is to allow the mother to care for her child as long as she can, and then to go through the proper natural grieving process, rather to find that she's in the position of being part of a procedure that brings that child's life to an end unnaturally.
Okay, I'm clear on what your position is on that. But again, when we're talking about people who have been raped, people who've been raped perhaps even as the victims of incest, you said that it would be an additional cruelty, to paraphrase, to offer an abortion to someone in that case. Are you actually suggesting then that it's your position that you think even in those extraordinarily hard and difficult cases, abortion should not be offered to people who find themselves the victims of rape by incest?
I think every abortion is an unjust deprivation of an innocent human life, so in that case it cannot be supported. I think.
Does that mean that you would force someone in that situation to have that baby?
Well, the thing is, they're having the baby. What I would say is they need support. They do not. The rape is not undone by an abortion. So if we move on to the territory of these hard cases, which I know suits the pro-abortionists because we talk about these extremely hard cases which are harrowing, but I would say harrowing cases need extra compassion. They do not need what people think is a fast, quick fix solution.
No, but they also need an answer to the questions around them, John. And I just want to be
Darren,
clear.
I've answered all your questions. Abortion is always the
wrong,
of an innocent.
and even in those circumstances, you think it would be worse.
In those circumstances, I think compassion is needed for the victim of any of these terrible crimes. And I think adding an extra trauma of abortion on top of that does not help the women concerned.
Right. I know a very great number of people, John, would be listening to this and saying if you want to offer compassion to somebody who has been raped as the victim of incest, you allow them not to have to carry to term the product of that incest and the product of that rape. That would be the compassionate thing.
I would say two things to that, Darren. One is there are human beings going about today who were the products of rape, and their lives matter as well. Secondly, a lot of women who have been raped find that supporting and nurturing the life is one of the terrible effects, but the opportunity not to participate in ending someone's life is something that they're glad that they did. So for the cases where it's often a panic, a shock, of course, and to say there's a quick fix to this, it's not a quick fix to that. It does not undo the terrible ordeal that they've gone through, and that needs to be addressed, and it's not addressed by simply getting rid of the pregnancy through abortion.
There are very many people also, let's take this out a little bit wider, John, away from those very hard cases. We can agree that they are hard and traumatic and terrible cases. For people who simply recognise that having become pregnant, it is not appropriate in their life. They don't feel they'd be able to offer the child any kind of parenthood. And we're talking perhaps at 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 weeks. Why shouldn't someone in that position have the right and the freedom not to continue with that pregnancy if they don't believe, as you do, that life begins at conception? Why should you have the right to enforce that belief on them?
Well, I think because we live in a society that has the rule of law and we have to exercise reason. Now, what I can reasonably put forward is that your life began at conception, my life began at conception, every human being in the planet's life began at conception. Now, if I take away that life at any point after that, I'm depriving a human being of their life. So that's the reasonable position I'm putting forward. It's the position on which our international human rights instruments are all founded. If you look, for example, at the Article 2 of the European Convention of Human Rights, it says no one shall be deprived of his life. That's the actual wording of it. Now, those who study human rights law, one of the things told to as a rule of interpretation is to give provisions their maximum breadth. Now, I don't know how you can give everyone what's used in everyone has the right to life. I don't know how you can give that its maximum breadth of interpretation and still exclude some people from it. So our international human rights laws reinforce that life begins at the beginning and it should be protected right through, so everyone equally in our society has the right to life protected.
So why do so many scientists believe, contrary to that life as we understand it does not begin at the point of conception?
Well, if you bring
why are they wrong?
Forward, if you bring the scientists forward, I'd like to ask them why. Where did they say that this humanity comes from? If it doesn't come when you have a mother and father conceiving a new being, and that new being is obviously human, it is living, it has an independent DNA in existence, it's obviously human. Scientists perhaps have been conformed to the spirit of our age, which incessantly tells people that abortion is a good thing. That's something that's fairly recent over the last 5 decades, but before that it was the reasonable thing to assume that any human being at any stage, even in the womb, was worthy of protection, had a dignity that should be respected. And I'm afraid in our age it is the blind spot of our society that's supposed to be focusing on human rights. And I'm afraid if you keep repeating something, sadly many people start to believe it, and it takes in even scientists who are willing to distort their scientific reason to conform to the political ideology of abortion that we have prevailing today. Right.
I don't know if any scientists are listening who wish to give me a call and maybe answer the charge that they're having their scientific beliefs contorted in such a fashion to fit the prevailing political orthodoxy. 03456060973. And just a final sort of word on this, John. I don't necessarily accuse you of this, but there are certainly those who take the same view that you do, that protection of the unborn child, so-called, is very, very important. It seems to me, and again, I'm not accusing you of this, that some of those people actually don't really care about that child the second it's born. They will do everything they can to ensure that it is born, but the second that it is, they don't care what kind of life it has. They don't care if it emerges into a world where its parents can't afford to look after it. They don't care what sort of existence it has once it emerges from the womb.
Yeah, I think it's a sort of allegation that's often used. I think people want those who campaign for the right to life to be quiet, and any excuse will do. So they will say, "Oh, well, you don't campaign on this issue. You don't campaign on housing or in poverty or homelessness." But there are many challenges in our society, and people work in a variety of them. Some people concentrate on the pro-life movement because the scale of the loss of life is enormous, and it dwarfs any other loss of life that we're confronted with in society. But what I would say is that people involved in the pro-life movement have compassion for every human being. So we typically, you will find that they are working exactly in those things. You'll find it's the sort of people who are working at soup kitchens, who do care about the homeless, who do donate to other charities. So I think it's just an allegation that's used as another excuse just to tell pro-life people to go away.
John, thank you for that. John Deighan, Deputy CEO of the Society for the Protection of Unborn Children, responding to this vote in Westminster.